Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda, Cities ABC Open Business Council YouTube podcast series. We are a fast-growing platform that has been focused on profiling the global leading inspiring people, CEOs, authors, entrepreneurs, technologists, academics, and the global experts changing and creating solutions to our world. We highlight ideas, products, inventions, software, books, and solutions to the multiple challenges, opportunities we face in our cities and nations. These podcast series are produced by and distributed on our platforms, besides, of course, YouTube and the major global podcasts on citiesabc.com and openbusinesscouncil.org, and syndicated on the intelligenthq.com, fashionabc.org, EdgeThink, and Traders DNA. So today, I welcome someone that I know for some time and I deeply respect, so Karl Smith. So Karl Smith is a particular border person in the sense of, I would say, polymath, but as well someone that can actually mix a lot of different kind of expertise. Is quite unique in our world. So he's a serial entrepreneur, a thought leader, a fellow of the British Computer Society, and as well someone that has been working the crossroad between, especially, and is a global expert in that area in terms of user experience, so UI, UX, and as well the areas of technology, and the relationship between all the areas I will look at in terms of technology, and as well relating this with the thought leadership. He's a global influencer recognized in many areas, and as well trying to make the bridge with our user experience touches hearts, culture, ideas, and social entrepreneurship and social impact. As a polymath combining design, engineering, science, and humanities in his work, he holds a master in computing from the Napier University in Edinburgh and a BA in three-dimensional design from Middlesex University in London, and he's been working in major global projects in terms of areas like customer journey, target operating models, idea to value for outcome-based transformations, and a lot of concepts that are key for our world, sometimes probably more academics, but very important when it comes to build technology like PropTech, GovTech, FinTech, and agile organization design. I think some of these benchmarks has been working in global organizations, leading some of the discussion and thought leadership on these areas, but as well coming up with a very strong thought leadership research that is present in social media, where he has a global outreach, quite unique for someone that is a very hardcore technologist and research and thought leader. So welcome to our series, Karl. I could talk for much more, but
thanks, Dinis. I was beginning to wonder if I recognized who you were talking about, but you tend to not look back. You just keep on plowing on with whatever's in front of you. So, yeah, I've had an interesting and varied career. In fact, I did an interview recently saying that I didn't actually have a career because what I've tried to do is move from interesting and complex projects to the next interesting and complex project. So I think my CV reads as a total disaster for careers, but in terms of the projects, it's been really exciting.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's a disaster.
Well, you know what I mean. I think there's a concept out there that you must do one thing, and I think Steve Jobs says do one thing well, or said do one thing well. But I try and do lots of things well. In fact, my website says I actually changed it to Polymath Knowledge, and it says Masters of Much as the tagline, because actually I try and master as many different things as possible. I don't know when I'm going to need them, but I want to understand them and not assume that I've understood them. I want to challenge my thinking.
How did you become, and I want to start by that, so as a polymath and as well a thought leader, and as well a fragmented researcher, let's put it that way. I would prefer more a curious person. I think if you look at one of my models, Leonardo da Vinci, I think you are you are following his footsteps.
He is my hero. He's,
Okay,
if I had a hero, he would be it, because I was very interested in art when I was quite young. I paint in oils. I write music. I don't have professional outlets for that. I write poetry. I'm interested in expression, but not at the surrender of serving the greater world, if you see what I mean. There are people who are much better at that kind of thing, and I let them get on with it. What I'm quite good at is working out how to tie things together, things that people wouldn't normally understand. For most of the world, that's just innovation. Occasionally, I get to invent stuff as well.
You make a fantastic bridge between hardcore research technology, as well the ideas that you mentioned, art and culture, and even, well, not even, social impact is a key element. And then, of course, entrepreneurial and as well technology practicalities, because a lot of people that are very academic are really not good on research and not good on the entrepreneurial part, or even they don't understand anything about the cultural or artistic part. So how did that start? So I would like to go a bit for your career background, actually not career, probably personal background in education.
I'm going to go back to high school or secondary school, and I sat in front of my careers advisor at 14 and was told I was too stupid to go to university. I'd actually been tested for dyslexia when I was 11, but my parents never told me the results and never told me what the test was for. So I didn't actually find out I was dyslexic until I was 18. So I never knew it as a thing and never knew it as a crutch. But at 14, I was told I was too stupid, not intelligent enough to go to university. And the effect it had on me was the exact opposite of its intent. It made me want to go to university. So I think deep inside of me as a human being, there's a high level of dissatisfaction. And that dissatisfaction drives me to understand rather than think I know anything. You know, I actually do research about work that I do. I ask clients awkward questions. I've sat on panels in Westminster and asked the incoming Bank of England head of Bank of England questions he couldn't answer, because it's kind of a role that I have in general, is ask awkward questions now to avoid having disasters later. And I think that along with that drive, and I don't know where the drive comes from. I don't know why I'm so dissatisfied, but I am, and I'm not going to stop being that way until things are fixed. I don't know why it is. I'm actually writing a book about the last 100 years at the moment, and it's basically describing how we're in stasis. You know, as cultures and as economies, we are maintaining what we were in 1920s still. Now we've got new toys on layers above and new technology and all this sort of stuff, but actually the economics haven't changed. We have not evolved as cultures. We're still trapped in our cultural values over our humanity. Humans are still dying for absolutely no reason at all. There's more than enough wealth for everyone on this planet to be very well looked after. Yet we have cultural systems that actually revel in the destruction of other humans. I find it, looking purely at a logical level, it's just insane. I think that we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel with each new generation. We should actually solve the problems, get rid of the problem, and move on and actually become better humans.
People that told you that you are limited, whatever, these were teachers, or it was
it was the head of careers.
Wow. that shows the challenge we have when it comes to our education, that really is not about getting the best out of people, but sometimes limiting and actually because it could have destroyed, but it made you stronger.
It could have destroyed it. It had the opposite effect on me, but I think that was a lot to do with my culture. My parents were Irish immigrants into England, and so we made ourselves. We didn't have anything to lean on culturally that could propel us. My father started doing sort of bookkeeping type stuff when he first came to England. He went to night school while having 3 children, became an optician, and ended up as the Queen's optician. He had the royal warrant. He made himself, and that kind of drive is what he's instilled into his children. All 3 of us are very, very different people, And I would say growing up, I grew up in what I describe as an adversarial household. We had to argue our point. It wasn't good enough to have an opinion. You had to be able to prove why that was right. And that was really helpful. So culturally and sort of family history, it drove me to really think about what I was doing and why, and not just respond to situations and not just take the negative and run with it. In every negative situation, I always see opportunity.
From your long career that goes through a lot of different directions, and as well, like you mentioned, quite rich, but as well very diverse. So you are right now leading the Paradigm Interactions Inc. network as a futurist and thought leader. You are as well in the Agility 20 Reflect Festival, and as well as a book author, you've been writing multiple books like Designing for Human Experience, Servant Leadership Experiments in Ways of Working, and you have a couple of other things like Agile in an Unexpected Journey, so which is very important, and this in itself would be an interview for each of them. But I want to just go a bit through this kind of journey that you've been having, a fantastic journey, and can just hearing your highlights from that troubled person that tried to push you down to become who you are right now, and some of your highlights in terms of your career.
So I think, the taking the negative and turning it into the positive, which I know is a common phrase, but actually is what I've done all the way through. Being told I wasn't clever enough was quite a slap in the face, because I was very good at chess. I actually beat the British number one at chess when I was about 15. Mind you, he was playing 20 other people at the same time, so I was one of two people that beat him. There's a lot of context shifting there, but I think that the point is that I knew that I had something that was uniquely me, and taking that and saying, well, what do I do with it? So in the first instance, I went to a university. I got training, but the point is I didn't just adopt it. I interrogated it. I wanted to know what it meant. So I went to art college and learned about design, but I went down to the nth degree of finding out what it meant to think like a designer, not just to do design. So what I say often is my opinion is not important. My opinion based upon the customer target audience's opinions is useful. I've got to filter what I think, because why would anyone spend $100 million on Karl's opinion? That would be mad. Spend $100 million on your target audience and align your product or services to them. That makes sense. So I went through the whole design thing. I have adopted a number of different things. So I've adopted the Bauhaus, which is functional aesthetics. So I do like things to look nice, but if they're not functional, they're worthless. And that's really important when you take that into software and engineering. There's a big drive in software and engineering to make things look pretty, but they forget that it needs to be functional as well. The customer experience is defined by fulfillment, not by nice looking buttons. And that's really why I got into user experience. I got into it accidentally. My first job, I was working with the EMI group, and I walked past an office and someone was talking about something, and I said, no, do that. And this is someone walking down a corridor. Apparently the room should have been locked because it was a military project they were working on, but they'd been working on for 6 months, and I solved it by hearing it anecdotally through the door. And what it was an information architecture. And if you can think that way, structured thinking around complex components, then you can solve problems really easily. And then from there, I did some work with the military, and I went from that into banking because it's the same thing. Okay, there's hopefully a lot less deaths in banking, but the intent of banking is high frequency, critical task interactions. And I took that into banking and actually worked on a number of trading platforms. And that kind of really thinking about how it's going to be used and how it's going to be delivered is something that had not really been a priority before. Taking the design concepts of ergonomics, which is the physical aspect of use, with anthropometrics, which is the parameters of standard behaviors or interactive behaviors, and having everything measurable was not a common thing back in the 1990s. So that kind of catapulted me into quite a number of different possibilities.
I think this has been your trajectory, is precisely looking for that direction in terms of bridging all these areas, because this is key, I think, more and more for anything we're doing in technology and our business in general, because especially with COVID-19, we are becoming digital 100%, even the ones that didn't want to. So, and a lot of governments didn't want to, I didn't have a clue. So I want to go back to this central work. So you've been working with a lot of big organizations, from NatWest Bank to Wipro Digital, Accenture, and a lot of big organizations. So from your experience, and I think especially as one of the global experts in UI, UX, and all the custom CX, or whatever terms you use, the customer journey, digital infrastructure. So what have been the biggest challenge you've been facing in your career doing this? Because I think this is particularly interesting, and I think key element for anyone listening to us.
I think the biggest challenge is getting people to do the right thing for the right reasons. So if I remember going to clients in Edinburgh 25 years ago and expressing that they needed to get involved with user experience and some very major agencies, and being laughed out of the room on the basis that they said their clients would never pay for this kind of work. So I ended up working in London instead, and I ended up working for a whole bunch of Scottish clients. It was very strange because I think I've had to spend a whole lot of time doing advocacy over stuff that should be straightforward. I think there's a big issue that people have with ego in business, that they would rather take ownership and appear to be right than give over any kind of control to someone from outside, and they feel that it's their domain. Whereas personally, when I go and see a doctor, I do listen to their advice. I don't tell them what to do, and I don't tell them that they're understanding or diagnosing incorrectly, because I don't have the background. Yet often in business, that's what I experience is people have a few buzzwords and they use them to great extent without understanding what they actually mean, and it's embarrassing. I don't really want to stand up in front of a board and say you're all talking nonsense. I mean, it's Forbes level knowledge, which is essentially what someone wrote who knew a little bit. It's not deep knowledge. You don't want to do that to people, but at the same time, you also can't be controlled by it. So I do have a bit of a reputation for being truthful in business, which is a bit of a shock to people. I get employed to deliver. I don't get employed to talk about delivery. Anything that I can come up with, I can also deliver, because I have to work it through in my mind and build the entire thing. That's really helpful to clients who recognize that they're not experts in everything, but clients who think that they are. We don't really last together very long. And this thing, as I say, there's lots of things I don't know, but I declare it. I think my father told me when I was in my teens, is the only thing worse than making mistakes is making them again. So I'd rather declare my lack of knowledge and declare my knowledge than actually bluster through, which is counterculture. And I've done the Dale Carnegie training management course, and a lot of that is about framing conversations and owning a sense of where this conversation will go and what you're trying to do, and giving a forward-facing view that what's happening. So I get that, but actually at the same time, in private, they really should just take advice. And I actually wrote a prediction about 2021, in terms of digital transformation, that people will start realizing that the last 15 years of digital transformation, they've been buying technology but not actually transforming their processes or their people. So that people are not actually able to be to operate in a digital frame of reference. And most people think digital is technology, and it's not. Digital is about how you communicate with your customers. And that isn't sending an email. Communication is everything you say about them and everything you do. If someone says to me, Karl, I think you're fabulous all the time doing this, it's clear that they don't really mean what they're saying. And a lot of companies do that in their digital engagement. They say in the press that our most important asset is our customers, all the while they increase their charges without recourse. That's a form of communication. How you build your products and services, or communication.
One of the challenges I've been facing as both thought leader and entrepreneur is sometimes the challenge between doing that work that you're talking, so that making sure that we listen to the audience, and at the same time making sure that in the business we can actually make that right. So, and I think as an entrepreneur, I'm probably on the verge of being an entrepreneur, thought leader, and sometimes the two things converge, or sometimes they just clash, which is probably a lot of times, as you probably feel the same. But yeah. I think one of the things that I want to ask you is because, let's say, if you look at, let's say, most of the business, let's say we're talking about, there's around 450 million SMEs and micro SMEs around the world. But of course, let's say we're talking about 500 to 1,000 companies lead the world economy. But then the rest of the jobs are created by the small ones. So we have like a paradox here. So we have like big corporations that some of them have legacy systems that are challenged and going through a lot of things. Other companies that are not digital at all. But at a certain point, everyone is using a digital device. Everyone, even the ones that don't know anything about digital. And for instance, I've been having that challenge from CEOs that don't understand anything about digital, but everyone has an opinion. So how do you bridge, and I'm particularly interested in this because I always try, like you said, ask the questions and try to lead people to do something right instead of just criticizing, which is not easy because sometimes we get into our emotions. So how do you see, from your experience, work with big groups, because you've been working with big banks and big organizations, that we can actually get this, first of all, in our education system, because our education system is not digital at all. Although at the moment, all children and students in universities are using Zoom for their classes in one way or the other. And so how do you look at this, being as well a thought leader and a writer? Because this is, for me, the biggest problem we have in our civilization.
So I'm a thought leader because I've probably worked on a project about it. So I don't write about stuff I don't know. That's the first thing. And I extrapolate into futurism. So when you talk about learning and education, probably my biggest piece of work that I've ever done in that area was working with the Oxford University Press. Amazing client. And I was working with them on their digital presence, web presence, and created loads of pieces of work, including digital governance and digital strategies, taking them mobile first in 2009, which is maybe, it's a little bit on the early side, but the first thing I did that when I could get in front of them, when I spoke to the editors, who are basically like, Mount Olympus and the gods within the press, was asked the question, what will you do when it's illegal to print on paper? And you basically took away every sense of things that they understand at that point. And my question was, will you have some way to still exist as an organization? And, paper is made from wood pulp, and we breathe the oxygen that trees create. So it will become illegal at some point to print on paper and to use paper completely. The whole industry will cease unless we want to stop breathing. And if you are engaged with a specific area, you need to come up with those killer questions about what forces change. People want to adopt or have been adopting technology in a channels sense for many years because they see it as a way to optimize work or optimize jobs, to gain access, but they've never seen it as a critical path to exist. For instance, in banking, I see a future where open banking becomes the standard across the world, and we end up with one technology system for financial transactions with many branded products and services which are demounted from banks. So you won't have a bank account anymore. You'll have a transaction system and various banks that offer financial products. At the moment, they own their ecosystems. Open banking causes them to not be able to own the ecosystem, but to share their customers across the board. So I think we've got to think about what is the critical path for change within an organization and challenge people on that to make them understand that digital is not buying a black box that gives them extra server power. It's actually about how will you adapt your organization to fit where your customers are in 20 years and in 40 years. Do you expect to still be around?
Cool.
That's challenging for them, and they need to be challenged because most of them are very, very complacent about what it is that they do. Even the challenger banks are still wrapped up in mobile applications. What happens when we don't own mobile devices anymore, but we rent them? Or when
very...
or when the device is everything around you, the table is the device or the wall is the device. What happens then? You need to demount your technology from technical platforms and think about how am I different from any other interaction points for a customer. And this is the customers are moving. They are changing their perceptions and what they expect. Are you going to be there for them, or will you cease to exist? If you want me to polish your existing terrible technology stack to make it look slightly less worse than it is now, okay, we can talk about it, but it's not really going to actually help your business. And so my role is not working for technology. My role is helping the business get where it wants to get. And engage the customers where they will be when that initial transaction or that lifestyle transaction takes place.
So Karl, one thing, so going more practical. Okay, so let's say, talking about a fintech player, we talk about a startup or an organization. And for instance, if you look at Apple's success was their UI UX. They, especially with the iPhone, they revolutionized our world.
So I'm going to interrupt you on that and challenge you because
that's the idea. Tell me.
So Steve Jobs had a really negative view of UX. His view was that if you're first and it's good enough, then people will use it, which worked. It was true. The icon system that's in Microsoft is the Mac system, in case you didn't know that. So the icon system that was in Windows 3 was licensed from Apple. So Apple created the first icon system. Before that, it was all black screen and text nav. And so they were very good at thinking about how to transpose existing experiences into their products and services. But in terms of what's now described as UX, they didn't really do very much of it. They actually worked a lot of it out amongst their engineers. Steve Jobs said it was attributed with inventing the iPhone. Actually, it wasn't him. There was about 600 engineers that invented the iPhone, because they're the ones that actually worked around the problems. And they thought about how they used things, and then they thought about how things were built, which is why Apple took such a hit when Steve Jobs died, because everyone thought he was the ideas man. Well, actually, no, Apple's got some brilliant engineers. Steve Wozniak, a brilliant engineer. There's other like whole teams of brilliant engineers. Now, Apple now has become more focused on UX and UI because they have proliferated their business model into multiple other kinds of products. So I think that they have adopted it, but the underlying thought has been for a long time that customers don't know what they want. And I agree to a certain extent, but I'll tell you for one thing, they know exactly what they don't want. So you bring out a product that they don't want, and they'll don't want it en masse. They'll go somewhere else. So I think, you know, the design credentials I think that Apple has got is the engineering credentials and the product design stuff. The envelopes for their products are beautiful. You know, the engineer, the design engineer they had working, the product designers were just brilliant pieces of work. But until about 10 years ago, UX UI was not a priority to them.
When it comes to, let's say, the major global players in technology, which is the hegemonic, and at the moment they are as well the major global players, economical, financial, in all the different areas. Because, for instance, let's say in the Western world, the biggest fintech player is Amazon. It's not any of the banks. And then as well, in his market is and financials and Alibaba. So the point right now is this is become, let's say, the UI UX became the hegemonic part of technology, although it's very visible. People are not familiar with this, but everyone uses it. So, and there's two parts on the UI UX. There's the UI UX from the devices and the interaction things, and there's the UI UX from the data. So I would like to hear your views on that, because it's two different things that complement each other. They have to work together.
Okay, so first let's separate the pieces. So UI is a subset of UX. So UI is what you see. UX is how it works. You know, the interactions. UI is the visual presentation layer, the buttons and the page level design. And then within that, within the UX is the logic models and the data that drives those interactions. So often in projects that I've worked on, you know, my first starting point is to find out what data is available. What data is available to put onto the web systems, and what data is required to go into the data systems from the web systems to make transaction happen. You know, you know, Alibaba, Amazon. I would actually put eBay in there as well. It's big. It has a bigger economy than some countries. It's phenomenal, the size that we're talking about now. And these are financial organizations that allow people to transact the way that we thought that crypto would. We enthusiasts thought that we had found a way around the banks and the governments by having cryptos, but now the banks and the governments are taking over crypto because they want a piece of it. I think that these kind of organizations have heavily invested in the very close-up and localized view of how their customers want to transact. You know, they're really focused on doing the deal because that's where they make their money. I often ask clients, where do you make your money? And you could see that some of them thinking, oh, but we're a publisher, we make money by doing books, or we're a bank, we make money from transactions. I'm going, well, do you? Think about where you make your money. Well, in Alibaba and eBay and Amazon, they make money from hosting transactions. You know, there are their own versions, their own brands, but a lot of the time, other people are supplying the products and services. So Amazon started as being a bookseller and now has ended up being a hosting environment for other people to sell. You know, you can get the Amazon own brand, but they are going to become probably the biggest shop on the planet with no inventory.
So I think, so coming back to these parts of the UI UX and as well the customer journey. So, because I think it's important for people listening to us, and I think even for me to, like you said, make the difference between the two different areas. But I ask you one thing that I would like to go. So there's the devices, okay, and there's the data, user experience on the data. So more and more the experiences, let's say even Google does A/B testing. Facebook did actually. There was testing with millions of people that actually, in some cases, border the limit of using psychometry, and of course everything that happened with Brexit, with the US elections and so forth, and the way the user experience and the data usage is right now changing the world. So how do you see these areas from going right now from the helicopter view to more concrete parts? Because as well is about, in this case, it's more user interface from design, from data, and even from messaging and narrative.
Essentially talking about the implementation of a pattern analysis model, yes. Which is AI driven, and it's the classic people like me like this kind of product or this kind of conversation. So my feed is more directed to people like me. I think that was the story of a couple of AIs that were launched on the web that very soon became fascists and misogynists, because a lot of the self-expression online is along that direction, and therefore they adopted it. I think the social media certainly is becoming less and less social, and certainly hasn't been media for a while. It's become a way to express ideas that otherwise you would not have been allowed to publish in paper, and to find support for those ideas in a wider context. And the technology has not been held accountable. It's been allowed to run free. I think there's a certain level, certainly on Facebook, where it appears that they are letting it find its own level. And there's good things and bad things in that. There's obviously accountabilities, and there's a chance that they may lose that ability to not say they're responsible in the near future if Trump comes back in again, because he's made it clear that he would like to repeal their right to not be responsible, because he feels they have too much power. And I'm not saying on either side of the current election, but it's interesting because the newspapers, the actual media, would not be allowed to print what was available on Facebook. It would be in breach of so many different laws. The actual behavior, it is data driven, and data is the metadata, which is what is the intent, what is the content, what are the pictures, and it still runs to that absolute fashion of, I like these kinds of things. So what is my primary keys? What are my foreign keys in my data? And it's looking for attribution in other data sources, so it aligns me with people who are like me. And that's fascinating, because actually in the world, we have the exact opposite experience. We're constantly filtered and engaged with people who are not like us, which causes us to create something called society.
And that this is a very important thing, and one of the critical elements that we have today. So going through this, and I don't know, I think probably if you want to highlight some of the, I think you mentioned top level things, but some concrete examples of, let's say, a good case study of positive results that you got in some work that you did with a big major brand or a big organization. Because I think it's important to, I think for me, case studies are very important to understand this, especially in the case of UI UX, because there's a lot of myths about what is this. You might think, okay, good design, and you have, like you said, a lot of designers coming up with a lot of blah 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 and a lot of firework, but at the end of the day, it's very concrete things that you have the expertise. I would like to have any case study that you want to highlight for our audience.
So I'm going to give two. I'm going to give one which is a digital product and one which is a digital company. So the digital company, I was one of the founders for it, and how it evolved and what it was defined through context of digital. So that's really important. So the digital product was actually the UK online census in 2011. and people are going, well, that's not really a digital product. Well, actually it is. It's a system that allows the government to plan strategically for the whole nation. It's an essential tool. The government doesn't get the data. It's held by the Office of National Statistics, but they can inquire of that data in order to set government policy. The reason I'm highlighting that was because it was the first time that a UK government system helped the users. And people are going, what do you mean? Going, well, when they first took the tax form and put it online, they just basically took the tax form and put it online. You had to write in everything. There were no helpers. You couldn't transfer data from it. You couldn't even copy and paste. It was all blocked. So it wasn't helpful. It was just a different channel, a different way of adopting the same system. When we did the national census, we made it dynamic. It built itself based around your answers. So when you say that you're in a household with 4 different people from different families, it created 4 different forms to do. When you answered certain questions, it removed other questions from the process. The census expected to get, I think it was, I think about 15 million. They got about 45 million people use it, which is huge for a 65 million people country. I mean, those figures I'd need to reference back, but it was about 3 times more than they thought that they would get. But more importantly, the data was helpful. A lot of the time they got the paper forms back, they had to use a data analyst to actually reinterpret the data because it was badly formatted, not machine readable. The actual UI component of the form was the longest online form in British web history. It was massive. It was written in 2 different languages because it was written in Scots and Welsh, sorry, 3 languages, as well as English. And you could, because of accessibility, you'd need to be, or you need to be able to access it in your local language. I think the key learning was that it was also based on personas. It wasn't, there's no assumptions going on about who would use it. We got back to the core of what they were trying to do, which was to get more and data and more accurate data. That was the purpose of doing it online. It wasn't for open government. It was literally about getting better quality of data. And when we understood that, that allowed us to focus on how would we design and build it. So one of the things for the user experience that we did was we extended the login token. So they had wanted to have a 10-minute login token. What we did was we created lots and lots of personas, and then we asked the client who is the people who would less likely to give you the good, clean data that you need. And they said, and we worked out as men 18 to 25. So we tested the system that we had built as a wireframe, as an interactive wireframe using Axure, and found that after the men 18 to 25 stopped swearing, they would want to go and get a cup of tea before coming back and trying to fill out the form, and a piece of toast quite often. So we allowed them to do that. And so we extended the login period before the auto logout to allow for them to do that and still be logged in after making their tea and toast. Which sounds like a really stupid thing to do, but actually think about, we're trying to facilitate people who don't fill out the census. Other things that we did was, from a user experience perspective, I proposed graceful deferral. Now, no one had ever heard of graceful deferral at that point. Do you know, have you come across it?
Yeah, no, I understand. And yeah.
Okay, so graceful deferral is essentially, instead of the system falling over when it's got too many hits on a single page in a single second, you stop people from getting to that point. You don't allow them to log in when the system's got too many users on it, and ask them to come back later. That way they don't have a broken experience and don't have the first negative thing saying, it didn't work for me, I'm not going to bother. You're polite and you ask them to come back, and it worked really well. We had a 1 second page load requirement over 60,000 users in any given second for any page, and that was quite a major thing. And I think it was the first UK national system that worked without problems. There were no problems at all. Didn't make the press, not once. So I was very proud of that piece of work because
these are the things that we need to make in the press.
Yeah, most government systems fail because people take the eye off the ball, and they forget that it's a service relationship with the users. So one of my favorite or my least favorite bugbears is MVP, minimum viable product. And I changed that to MVE, minimum viable experience. Now, the guys that invented MVP intended that the experience be central to it, but a lot of engineers take the viability as the functional level of making something work. An MVE, minimum viable experience, is about completing a task. If you build a product where you can't complete a task, why did you do it? Why would you release something that you can't do anything with? That's insane. Yeah, a lot of companies will do that. So the second case study would be Wipro Digital. So I'm one of the 4 people that invented it. And we were working with Wipro Technologies at the time, and the CEO said, we need to engage with digital as an organization, but we don't know how. And I thought, well, that's brilliant. There's very few people who are that self-aware that they will ask the right question. And the CEO asked that question, and I said, okay, we will work on it for you, because there's no immediate answer. There's not an absolute. And what we came up with was that digital was not the products or services, but how you communicate with customers and how you fulfill their requirements. So that's what we built Wipro Digital on. There were 3 focuses. So technology, strategy, and the guys wanted to make the third one UX, and I said, no, we can't do that because it's too narrow. We make the third one design, but we put the customer at the center. So the customer is at the center of strategy, is at the center of technology and the center of design. And that's where the 3-pronged flower for Wipro Digital comes from. It's actually a diagram of the Venn diagrams between design, technology, and strategy. So where all the crossover points are, and that's what we're interested in digital. Technology is not interesting, even design's not interesting, but design with technology is interesting for customers. Design with strategy is interesting for customers, and technology with strategy. And at the very core, where design, strategy, and technology crossover is where the customer is. And that's where we need to focus as an organization. And that was really, we came up with all that in about 2 or 3 weeks. And then we had to build it. And I worked with them for about 1.5 years, and it's still going. Not everyone that started there is still there. And I think there is some great capability in that organization.
One of the works you've been doing, and I think it's very dear to me, is the work you've been doing in terms of accessibility related with technology, and as well all the work you've been doing. Both you mentioned the government, which in its case I think should be highlighted because it's key, and I think especially a lot of governments have no clue about that. And I think the UK government has been doing quite exceptional work on that level, even the way the tax system works and things like that. Being in Portuguese and a bit French person, I cannot say the same for my own other countries. And I think this could make a lot of difference. So what would be the areas that you highlight, especially in the areas of accessibility? Because it's a big thing right now. Everyone has different, you mentioned the disabilities. There are a lot of hidden and invisible accessibility and disabilities that are key. So any things you want to highlight on that area?
So I find the whole concept of disability quite interesting, because everyone's disabled.
It's true.
In some way. And it's actually in my intro to my book, Designing for Human Experience. And I kind of talk about an early experience I had with my father, who was involved in setting up a respite center for parents of disabled children. And I went in there and I saw them using all of these pieces of technology to communicate, do things that I took for granted. And I had not really been aware that there were other kinds of people with, that were unable to do what I could do just naturally, just easily. And I think it sort of blew my mind of it, because it changed my perception of what it means to be human. I think it's I think the common sense, the common thinking that people have is that some people are disabled. I think everyone has a disability of some description. They may not share it. They may not have, until recently, I never told anyone I was dyslexic. But actually, for me, it's a strength, not a weakness. What I find is that I see things that other people cannot even understand, because actually I learned to read by reading the gaps between letters. I can't see the letters. My mind can't see them. I actually had a specialist teacher come in when I was at primary school level to teach me to learn the sounds of the shapes between letters. And so how I understand the world and how I see things is very different, yet I still manage to operate within it. I think things like scotopic sensitivity are quite fascinating. Some people have a visual impairment to high contrast matters. Scotopic sensitivity relates to people who have a contrast value issue around pastel colors. They can't see them. It all becomes blended. My favorite statement on disability is that 50% of men are colorblind and 90% of electricians are men. Do you feel safe? So I think there's I don't want to denigrate people that have real difficulty, because there are some people who are very much mistreated by society because they have physical impairments that make it difficult to access services and things. But I do want to make it clear everyone's disabled. Some people need more help than others. I worked on a project for a disability rights organization around 2008, and it was really interesting. They had a website, and it was all about lobbying and engaging with councils and making it clear what people's rights were. But the biggest single area of value on that site was the dating site, because the people are human and they want to be loved. And I think that really brought it home to me. It's not about the outer casing, it's about the drive and the human. The outer casing is a limiting factor, and we can either help people or not. And I don't see that I'm any better than anyone else, except for the fact that I have an internal drive system that won't stop. If you can think like, how can the person with the most difficulty in using something use it effectively? That's good design. It's just as I said with the national census, we designed it around people that didn't use it.
Father is disabled, and I only understood how impactful this is, because you're talking about 1.1 billion people with some kind of disability, and like you said, everyone has some kind of disability. So I think that is more like, I would say not disability, it's more like a characteristic. In some cases it's more radical, but I think it's a virtue, because it has effects. But you might have learning difficulties, you might be having or not learning like the other people, but that makes you more unique. And I think that's a big challenge in our society that has to be tackled. So I want to go and in conscious of time, and I think probably we'll have in the future, I would like probably to challenge you for a podcast just about these areas, but I would go right now for two questions bigger. So one of the questions that I want to talk is, so You've been working, of course, in terms of all the areas of digital transformation, which you are a global expert, and of course UI UX are part of that, and all the user experience. But when it comes to society and at large, the concepts of digital transformation and especially AI, and I know that you as well have been working a lot in blockchain. So what would be your views? Because AI, there's the people that are more negative that say that we are already having an AI-driven society, and that is going to be creating or a society 5.0 that is probably most positive vision of this, or then a dystopic society that goes in a more radical level, which there's a lot of people. I am a bit afraid of that, to be honest, my own, even me working with AI. So I would like to have your views, because the way you program the machines and create the UI UX, we are creating that as well. So.
Okay, so first and foremost, there's not much real AI around. That's the first thing. There's a lot of automation, so staging data to be read by an AI, but a lot of that automation is not AI driven. It's not thinking. It's just staging the data in a way to allow it to be to view patterns. And there's so much data out there that is in such a mess that if we work on it for a couple of 100 years, we might get to a point where AI can have free reign. But until then, Skynet's not going to happen. So I think there is the sci-fi view of these technology, and then there's the real thing. My concern is that AI is based on Socratic logic, which is a redactive thinking set. And redaction in thinking means that we think there is a truth. And what we actually know as humans is there is no truth. There is the truth that is viable at the point at which we need it, and then we throw it away and carry on learning. So machines tend to only deal with a truth when you use an AI using Socratic logic, whereas I use dialectics. So I use a different logical form, and that means that, so dialectics is Hegel's dialectic, much maligned because it's associated with socialism, but actually it's a logical form. And dialectics would say that we, so in Socratic logic, you create a hypothesis and then you seek to disprove it. And when you disprove it, you knock it out and you move along with the new hypothesis. So it's a redactive, you throw things away. Also in data analysis under a Socratic logic model, you remove outliers. That's data that does not fit your expected sets of ideas and outcomes. That means that you remove potential innovation points. Whereas in dialectics, you combine them. So in dialectics, you create a hypothesis, and then the minute you do, within the data set, you create an antithesis, which is a direct opposite concept based on the outliers. But then you utilize them to create the synthesis, which is a midpoint between the two. So it's more of an adaptive and thoughtful way of doing AI. Now, under Socratic logic, we have good and bad. Under dialectic logic, we have unknowns that lead to ideas. And I think that's probably my concern with AI is focused on Socratic logic. We have an absolute sense that something means something. Well, actually, no, we don't. In user experience, we have quantitative data and qualitative data. Quantitative tells us what, qualitative tells us why. In AI, there is no why. There's only what. And someone is making an absolute decision based upon what, without any context or any sense of progression of those data points that created the what.
A lot of people are not conscious how they are manipulated by this first stage of mostly social media automation and social media interaction with us. And it goes as well in terms of UI, UX, because this technology is driven, for instance, you look from TikTok and the way they extract the data and the algorithms that are addictive to us. But well, that's a long discussion. I know that is your area of expertise, but I wanted to touch that and have input. So what are your views and goals when it comes to right now, the present and future of work, when the main trends in tech and society are right now becoming increasing digital, especially, and they were increasing adapted because of COVID-19. How do you see this?
I mean, the future of work is distributed. I wrote an article in 2017 saying smart investors are not investing in smart cities. I didn't think COVID-19 was going to cause people to realize that they don't need cities anymore, but in effect, in a world where we have limited resources that we need to pool them, we pool them in cities. Where our resources are digital, we don't need cities anymore, and we can live a distributed life. And people are finding that they actually prefer to not go into cities. They don't really want to commute. They had to commute. I think that what will need to happen, though, is that there'll be a rebalancing. Companies won't need to pay the same salaries for people working at home. It's that simple. You know, if the cost of living involves the travel into work and the environment of being in a city, compared to living in your house in Wiltshire or your house in Sardinia, then you know, you don't need to have the same levels of salaries, which will be a bit of a shock to people. But you know, the company themselves will not need to have the estates that they currently have. Unfortunately, that means that a lot of the jobs related to facilities management will go because people don't need those buildings anymore. And I did advise, when I wrote in 2017, for investment organizations to get out of property because property is too highly inflated as a value point. A lot of people's pensions are wrapped up in property, again, in cities where we don't need them. So I think there's those kind of things are quite important in terms of optimizing work. I think business is going to want to have a higher level of oversight on outputs. There's certainly been a lot of stuff on Twitter about people doing nothing and getting paid for it, and companies will want to start understanding what's happening in their work, so they'll be looking at workflow. You know, you've always been able to keylog someone's laptop to see how much work they're actually doing, but no one's ever really tried to do it across the whole organization. But I think companies are going to start to want to see outcomes, not time served, because you know they still need those things done. You know, I do a lot of collaboration work still. I just use things like Miro that allow me to do it live and people to interact with them like a whiteboard, but they can be anywhere they want in the world. So I think there's always been technology there to enable communication and co-working. It's just it's not been required because people were happy to go into an office. So I think that's going to be fundamental. What happens to the transportation systems that don't need to exist anymore? You know, we have essentially gone through 100 years of realignment in about 6 months.
Amazing, and I completely subscribe everything you said. So one last thing. So can you tell our audience about where to find your books, where to find your part? Because if you search for Karl Smith, there's 2 people with the same name.
All right, so I'm not the economist. There's a very well-known American economist called Karl Smith. And all credit to him. I've read some of his stuff. He's very interesting.
And there's a third one. There's a third one that is a guy in therapy and hypnosis. So you're competing with 2 guys. Although you have bigger reputation than them. It's actually tricky because your name doesn't. It's tricky. So that if you can get us, and there's a part of it as well about UI UX in some parts. But
well, I mean, the simplest way to find me on Google is Karl, Karl Smith. Put UX in, you'll find me. I've got about 2.5 million links. For the books the book that's out already and the books that are coming out, I'm on Amazon and I'm publishing through Amazon. It's a bit of a test and learn from my side to see how it works, because I've never published anything before, at least not tangibles. But my blog is available to anyone. It gets about 4.5 million views a year, which is apparently quite good. And I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm in the first 100,000 users of LinkedIn. I run 6 groups on it, and Twitter, User Experience U, about 40,000 followers. I'm open to people. I think that's the thing, is I see these things as not broadcast channels, but as conversations. So if you want to talk to me, talk to me. Yeah, I'm a human.
No, you have a massive follow-up. So I think LinkedIn, you have close to 20,000 people, and actually in Twitter, you're close to 50,000. So it's more than 40. Karl, I appreciate. I think we're going to put all these links, of course, in the interviews and in the YouTube channel, and in the different podcasts. So I appreciate the time. It's been a fabulous insight, and even for me, there's a lot of things and a lot of questions I have actually, but we leave that for a previous and continuous work.
Well, thanks, Dinis, for having me. It's been really interesting because I find all interviews challenging because I have to be made to think.